The towers of stellar apex pierced the clouds like blades of glass and steel, an alien geometry that seemed to bend the laws of physics just to remind visitors who held power here. David Mercer pushed his industrial cleaning cart across a corridor so polished it reflected the neon skyline far below. His movements practiced, quiet, deliberate. 3 weeks on the job, and still every corner of this place unsettled him. The suspended bridges that trembled faintly with passing gravity shifts. The walls that rippled with faint pulses of bioluminescence. The sense of being inside a living creature rather than a building. He kept his head down, uniform pressed but slightly ill-fitting, cut for alien proportions rather than human shoulders. It suited him fine. Invisibility was the point. After the war, after too many years in the Earth Defense Force intelligence corps, anonymity was peace. At least it was supposed to be. He paused outside the executive wing, double-checking the day's assignments on the glowing slate clipped to his cart. These halls were rarely empty. Security patrols in gleaming armor passed with silent menace, and the occasional assistant hurried by with a tablet hugged tight to their chest. Today, though, the corridor seemed eerily still, except for the faint vibration of voices spilling from the half-open door of the main conference chamber. David should have kept moving. A janitor's job was to clean, not to listen. But habits honed on battlefields die hard, and his ear tilted almost of its own accord. The human markets are ripe for exploitation. A rumbling voice declared, dripping satisfaction. Their governments are fractured, desperate for foreign investment. Another voice, high-pitched and nasal, cut in eagerly. Navarks has no idea what these assets are truly worth. By the time she realizes what she has signed away, the transfer will be irreversible. David's spine stiffened. He shifted the cart a fraction, walking sightlines to where he stood in the hall and leaned closer. The contract is airtight, the nasal voice continued. Page 94. That's where the real clause hides. Mining rights, full territorial sovereignty, all ours. Quintillions in rare elements. David felt a surge of cold spread through him. Proxima Centauri. Humanity's first true interstellar colony. Not just ore and figures on a balance sheet, but the pride of Earth, the symbol that his people belonged among the stars. To sell it away as a footnote in an alien consortium's contract was not business, it was theft. Conquest written in ink instead of fire. He clenched his fists, mind racing. This wasn't his fight. Interfering could mean termination, maybe imprisonment. Yet the voices inside were bargaining away the future of his species. He barely had time to process the enormity when a new sound cut through, the steady click of high heels on the marble floor. Livia Navarks appeared at the far end of the corridor, flanked by 2 aides. Tall, imposing, her skin the luminous blue of twilight skies, and her white hair drawn back into a severe knot that framed features, carved with aristocratic precision. She moved with the unhurried grace of someone accustomed to command. Her suit was black leather, with angular shoulders that made her seem even more formidable, the kind of attire that could silence a boardroom with its presence alone. David had glimpsed her twice before at a distance. Each time she'd looked untouchable, a being of another world. Now, as she drew closer to the conference room door, her hand extended to open it, he saw something flicker in her eyes' curiosity, a spark beneath the polished mask. And then his body betrayed him, moving before thought could stop it. "Ms. Navarks?" he blurted, abandoning his cart. His voice carried sharp against the hushed corridor. Security stiffened instantly, a guard's hand going to his sidearm. David pushed forward anyway, his pulse hammering. "Please, don't sign that contract." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Silence swallowed the corridor. Livia froze mid-step, her fingers inches from the door handle, her gaze sliding toward him with piercing intensity. No dismissal. No immediate order for removal, just stillness. And a sudden awareness that every set of eyes in the hallway had fixed on the janitor who had just stepped out of line. David's throat was dry, but he forced the next words out. Page 94. They've hidden a clause there. It transfers Proxima Centauri, our first colony, out of human hands forever. The guard seized his shoulder roughly, spitting the word fired like venom. But Livia raised one hand, arresting the motion, her expression unreadable. She studied him as though she could peel back the layers of his uniform with her gaze alone, searching past the sweat on his brow, past the insignificance of his role. Page 94? She repeated softly, her voice carrying the quiet edge of steel. The executives inside had no idea the course of their scheme had just shifted because a human janitor had spoken. And Livia Nevark's alien billionaire, corporate monarch, had chosen, for reasons only she knew, to listen. A conference chamber was a cavern of obsidian glass and shifting light, a space designed to humble anyone who entered. The long table stretched like a blade through the center, occupied now by 5 alien executives whose eyes snapped toward the door as it hissed open. Behind them, a panoramic wall displayed the city skyline, its towers veined with plasma conduits glowing in the perpetual twilight. Livia Nevarks entered with her aides in precise formation, her heels clicking against the polished floor. But instead of ignoring the janitor being dragged in behind her, she allowed him to stand, a silent command freezing the guards mid-step. The Vexorian chairman, jowls quivering with mottled purple flesh, erupted in protest. This is highly irregular. What is the meaning of bringing maintenance staff into executive negotiations? His voice rattled the crystalline fixtures, but Livia's reply was measured, her tone calm and lethal. This human claims to have overheard troubling details about your proposal. A contract with particular attention to page 94. The words fell like ice, and David felt the temperature in the room drop as the conspirators shifted in their seats, exchanging glances that betrayed their fear more than any denial could. The Saurian, thin-limbed and nasal, forced a laugh that rang hollow. Surely you don't intend to entertain the fantasies of a janitor? These humans are prone to paranoia. He must have misunderstood. David's chest tightened. Every instinct told him to stay silent, but something deeper, the old soldier's refusal to let truth be buried, pushed him forward. He straightened, ignoring the way his too tight uniform marked him as out of place among the tailored finery. I didn't misunderstand, he said, voice carrying with a conviction that surprised even himself. I heard you say the clause would transfer not only mineral rights, but territorial sovereignty. Once she signs, Proxima belongs to you, irreversible. A ripple of outrage circled the table. The Vexorian's complexion deepened to a bruised violet, and the Terrian guard at the door reached again for his weapon, but Livia silenced them all with a raised hand. Bring me the contract, she commanded. One of her aides hurried forward with a bound tablet, its holographic pages flickering as Livia began to turn them, her long fingers deliberate, eyes flicking up between lines to watch the executive squirm. She reached 94 and paused, the silence drawn out to an unbearable length. Then her expression hardened. Interesting. A clause that conveys not just extraction rights, but territorial governance of the entire Proxima system. A rather significant oversight in your presentation. The Saurian shifted, his voice breaking under the weight of her stare. A legal formality. It changes nothing of substance. Livia began to move, circling the table with the grace of a predator, her heels echoing like a metronome of doom. You believed I would not notice. That humans are too insignificant to warrant my scrutiny. That stellar apex would sign away the future of a species without pause. Her eyes cut to David, then back to them, the faintest suggestion of a smile at the corner of her lips. But you forgot one truth. I verify every source of information, regardless of origin. Even a janitor's warning. The room ignited in chaos. The Vexorian slammed a heavy fist on the table, shouting about slander and sabotage. The Saurian lurched suddenly, his spindly fingers flashing as a concealed weapon slid from his sleeve. David didn't think. Training took over, his body surging forward as he tackled Livia out of the line of fire. A pulse of energy hissed past, scorching the obsidian wall where her head had been. They crashed to the floor, his weight covering hers, the impact jarring the air from his lungs. For a heartbeat, everything froze: the alien voices, the scrambling security, the flickering light from the plasma conduits, and David found himself inches from her face. Her eyes, wide with surprise, locked onto his. Not fear, not anger. Something else. A recognition of the instinct that had just saved her life. Then the chamber erupted. Guards swarmed, subduing the would-be assassin, while the other executives shouted and protested their innocence. David rolled off Livia, pulling her to her feet. She smoothed her immaculate suit with trembling fingers, the only sign that she'd been rattled. "You've saved me twice in 5 minutes, Mr. Mercer," she said softly, the use of his name sending a shiver through him. "That is remarkable." A sudden alarm blared, red light cutting across the chamber. One of her remaining guards sprinted to her side, helmet guns buzzing. "CEO Navark's mercenaries are breaching the lower levels." This was a diversion. Livia's composure held, though her eyes sharpened with calculation. She turned to David again, the mask of corporate power giving way to something more direct, more human. "You move like a soldier, not a janitor. Who are you, really?" David hesitated, the weight of years he'd tried to bury pressing on his chest. Former Earth Defense Force. Intelligence. The confession slipped free, like a blade unsheathed. "I wanted out, so I became invisible." Another tremor rocked the building, this one closer. Livia's lips pressed into a thin line. Invisible no longer. "You're with me now." She pressed her palm against a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a narrow passage lit by emergency strips. "If they want stellar apex, they'll have to go through us. And I, for one, am not ready to sign anything they've written." She stepped into the corridor without looking back. David followed, pulse hammering, his janitor's cart long abandoned behind him. The life he had chosen was gone, swept away in the space of a single warning. What remained was something he thought he had left forever: danger, beauty, and the weight of a future balanced on choices. Made in shadows, the maintenance corridor closed around them like the throat of some vast machine. Walls humming faintly with conduits and unseen turbines. The polished grandeur of Stellar Apex's executive wing was gone, replaced by exposed piping, narrow platforms, and the smell of recycled ozone. David led the way instinctively, pulse pistol tight in his grip after one of Livia's guards had thrust it into his hand. He moved with the careful precision of a man who had memorized exits in every place he had ever set foot. His senses sharpened now by adrenaline, and by the awareness of the CEO following close behind him. She walked with an elegance that seemed out of place here, her black suit brushing against grime-streaked railings. But her eyes were sharp, calculating, scanning every angle. "You seem to know these passages better than my engineers," she said quietly, voice taut but controlled. David glanced back, the ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth despite the chaos. First rule of staying alive: always know your exits. "I learn buildings the way some people learn prayer." Her gaze lingered on him for a beat longer than necessary, a flicker of something curious beneath her ice. Before the sharp echo of boots behind them broke the moment, they ducked into a wider chamber where a massive waste chute yawned like a cavernous maw in the floor. Streams of air, sucking faintly downward, toward processing levels far below. A hum of machines covered their breathing as David peered over the edge, calculating cycles. 20 minutes before the next flush, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Livia tilted her head, pristine hair catching the emergency glow strips. "You're suggesting we hide in the garbage?" Her tone was equal parts incredulity and curiosity. David allowed himself a thin grin. They won't expect their quarry to take the dirtiest exit in the building. Trust me. It's unorthodox, but it'll get us past their sweep. She regarded him for a long moment, her blue skin lit in electric hues by the warning lamps. And then, to his surprise, she laughed softly. Humans, always unpredictable. The sound was melodic, startling in its warmth. And David felt the tightness in his chest ease for just a heartbeat. Before he could reply, voices carried through the ducts behind them, the guttural tones of Krell mercenaries, weapons clattering against metal. "They're down here. Sweep every passage. The CEO dies tonight." David seized Livia's hand without thinking, pulling her flush against him as they pressed into the shadow of a filtration tank. Her body was tense, warm, her rapid breathing brushing his neck. The mercenaries' footsteps grew closer, their words dripping contempt. "Humans are filth. Maybe the janitor will drown in the waste where he belongs." David felt Livia's fingers tighten on his arm, a gesture of solidarity that carried more weight than any speech. For a moment, pressed chest to back in the cramped dark, the danger seemed less immediate than the contact itself. The glow of her communication device flickered suddenly in her palm, casting blue light. David cursed under his breath, covering it with his hand just as a mercenary's head swung their way. He made a split-second choice bursting out from cover, driving his shoulder into the alien with explosive force. Energy bolts shrieked through the chamber as chaos ignited. Livia rolled, drawing her sleek weapon with startling precision, dropping one mercenary with a pulse shot. David fired from the hip, movements fluid, controlled, the old instincts flooding back as though the years of hiding had never existed. The fight was brutal and short. 2 mercenaries fell. The others regrouped, shouting for reinforcements. David's heart hammered, but he forced calm into his voice. "We can't hold here. Down the chute now." Livia looked at him as though weighing a gamble, then nodded once, decisively. Together, they scrambled toward the yawning shaft, the air thrumming louder with the approach of the next cycle. David wrapped an arm around her waist, the closeness electric in the charged silence between plasma fire. "On 3, he whispered. 1, 2. They leapt, vanishing into the dark throat of Stellar Apex's underbelly as the mercenaries stormed into the chamber behind them. Too late. For several endless seconds, they slid side by side down the slick chute, bodies pressed together by speed and gravity, the rush of air drowning out even their own hearts. David tightened his hold around her, every instinct screaming to protect, to shield, to survive. Livia's eyes locked with his, wide, startled, luminous in the dark. And in that impossible descent, David realized something had shifted. He was no longer a janitor, no longer invisible. He had chosen, in the most unorthodox way possible, to stand in the light again beside her. They landed hard in a cavernous collection chamber, the smooth floor jolting the breath from David's lungs. For a moment, he and Livia lay tangled together, their bodies pressed close, the air thick with the scent of ozone and adrenaline. She shifted first, rising with the grace of a woman accustomed, regaining composure no matter the fall. David followed, brushing grime from his uniform, eyes scanning the vast space around them. Machines hummed in dormant cycles, warning lights pulsing at intervals that told him they had 16 minutes before the next processing flush. "This way," he whispered, guiding her toward a narrow service corridor. Their footsteps echoed in the hollow belly of the corporation as they moved deeper, avoiding the wide open spaces. Every nerve in David's body screamed that they were being hunted. Livia's cum device vibrated against her palm. She checked the display quickly, relief flickering across her face. Tehran is positioning a team at access point C7. We rendezvous in 10 minutes. Extraction will take us straight to my shuttle. She looked at David with crisp assurance. We're almost through this. But his gut twisted. His instincts, sharpened by years of intelligence work, read the situation differently. No patrols blocked their way. No resistance slowed them. The corridors felt too empty, too quiet, like silence before an ambush. He slowed his steps, his eyes narrowing as they approached the indicated junction. Wait. He touched her arm, halting her just short of the reinforced door. She turned to him, irritation in her gaze, until she saw the tension in his posture. Something's wrong, he murmured. Standard extraction protocol would post 2 guards outside. Where are they? Livia checked the comms again, frowning. He said they were in position 10 minutes ago. David drew a small mirror-polished plate from a discarded console, tilting it around the corner. The reflection caught the shimmer of armor and the ugly profile of Krell mercenaries crouched in ambush, weapons ready and pointed at the door. At least 6. He ducked back, cursing under his breath. It's a trap. Shock widened Livia's eyes, then narrowed them with cold fury. That's impossible. This point isn't on public schematics. Only my inner circle. Her voice trailed off, realization dawning. She scrolled rapidly through the comm log, her sharp mind parsing the syntax. Her face hardened. The phrasing, it isn't his. Either they compromised Tehran's device, or she couldn't finish. David did it for her. Or he sold you out. The words hit like a blade, and for a moment her perfect posture wavered, her blue skin paling beneath the emergency glow. But when she looked up again, her gaze was forged steel. Then we can trust no one. David nodded grimly, pulse steady, now that instinct had been proven right. Extraction is blown. We need another way. Livia's fingers danced over the schematic she projected in midair. The central security hub. 2 levels up. If we take it back, we regain control of the building. Lock out their forces. Identify the traitor beyond doubt. David raised an eyebrow. That's not an escape plan. That's a counterattack. A fierce smile ghosted across her lips. I didn't build Stellar Apex by running. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, David saw not just the calculating CEO, but a woman fighting to defend her life's work, unwilling to be victimized. Admiration surged in him, alongside something more dangerous, connection. He adjusted his grip on the pistol. Then up we go. They'll expect us to run down, not climb into their teeth. She gave a short nod, her voice edged with determination but laced with something warmer. Perhaps you're rubbing off on me. Unpredictability. Alarms echoed faintly in the ducts above them as they backtracked, choosing a service ladder that cut into the vertical heart of the building. As they began to climb, pressed close in the narrow shaft, David felt the gravity of what had just unfolded. Betrayal in her own ranks. A consortium ready to strip Earth bare. And him no longer invisible, no longer just a janitor, but the one man Livia Navarx had chosen to trust in the storm god. The elevator shaft was a vertical canyon of steel and humming grav lifts, stretching up into shadows that seemed endless. David climbed first, his hands gripping the cold rungs, the pistol holstered at his hip, but always ready. Livia followed close, her movements surprisingly sure despite the sharp angles of her tailored suit. The glow strips flickered, throwing her blue skin into shifting light and shadow. Halfway up, they paused on a narrow maintenance ledge as an elevator roared past, the displaced air buffeting them against the shaft wall. Pressed close in the confined space, David felt her breath at his shoulder, her composure tested but not broken. "Tell me, Mercer," she said softly, voice nearly lost under the hum of machinery. "Why does a man with combat reflexes and intelligence eyes hide behind a mop?" He hesitated, his gaze fixed upward, but the truth spilled out. "After the war, I wanted peace. Anonymity, I'd seen too much. Done too much. Being invisible felt safer than being useful." For a moment, silence lingered, broken only by the groan of metal supports. Then Livia's fingers brushed his arm, light but deliberate. "Invisible? Hardly. You've saved me twice already today. That doesn't sound like a man afraid of purpose." They resumed the climb, and something unspoken traveled between them, a thread drawn taut by danger, trust, and proximity. At the top, David pried open a service hatch, pulling Livia into the maintenance corridor above. According to her schematic, the security hub lay just beyond, heavily fortified and almost certainly guarded. David crouched, checking the charge on his pistol. "No sneaking past this one," he muttered. Livia's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. From a concealed pocket, she produced a metallic sphere, sleek and ominous. "Sonic disruptor. Incapacitates everyone in a 20-foot radius. Not lethal, but highly persuasive." David raised an eyebrow. "Prepared for a CEO." Her smile sharpened. "Prepared for survival." On her count, she rolled the sphere through the access door. A pulse of invisible energy rippled out, and the muffled shouts of mercenaries collapsed into groans as armored bodies hit the floor. David moved like a shadow, stripping weapons from their twitching hands, covering the corridor while Livia strode into the hub. The room was a cathedral of consoles and holo displays, its central platform commanding the building's entire security grid. She took her place at the console like a queen reclaiming her throne, her fingers dancing across the holographic keys, her voice taut with purpose. Sealing bulkheads, isolating hostiles, tracing internal comms. Then she froze, eyes narrowing as text scrolled across the screen. David leaned in and saw the logs-long detailed transmissions, sent not just tonight, but for years. Tehran's identifier stamped across them all. He wasn't compromised. He had been the architect of betrayal from the beginning. "Every initiative involving humans," Livia whispered, her voice shaking not with fear but with fury. "Every partnership, every step forward, I see his hand undermining it, feeding the consortium." The air seemed to vibrate with a restrained rage. Before David could answer, the hub door slid open, and the traitor himself filled the frame. Tehran's massive body seemed even larger in the confined space, his sky-blue skin darkened by shadows, his eyes calculating and cold. "Livia," he said smoothly, as though they were still allies, "thank the stars you're safe." Her voice turned to ice. "Safe from you, Tehran. I've seen the logs. You've been selling me out for years." His expression hardened, the mask dropping. "Humans are a contagion. Your obsession with them would have doomed us all. I did what was necessary." His hand dropped toward the weapon at his side. David fired first, the bolt grazing Tehran's shoulder, but the security chief lunged with inhuman speed, crashing into David like a boulder. They hit the console hard, sparks spraying as systems faltered under the impact. Pain flared in David's side, but he locked into combat focus, redirecting the alien's bulk with practiced leverage instead of trying to overpower it. Each strike was precise, trained, human ingenuity against brute force. Livia tried to intervene, but Tehran lashed out, sending her sprawling across the floor. The sight of her fall ignited something primal in David, a surge of protective fury that cut through exhaustion and pain. He twisted free, striking pressure points no alien brute expected, until the giant staggered. Tehran roared, drawing a concealed blade, its edge shimmering with energy. He slashed, grazing David's side, burning pain flaring hot. But David caught his wrist, forcing it down, twisting until the weapon clattered away. A final series of brutal strikes drove the traitor to his knees, gasping, bleeding, beaten. Livia was already on her feet, her weapon leveled at him, her voice steady with righteous fury. "You betrayed everything we've built," she said, every syllable sharp as glass. Security forces loyal to her swarmed in, seizing the broken chief. Only then did David allow himself to stagger, his palm pressed against the wound at his ribs, blood seeping hot between his fingers. Livia was instantly at his side, her ice melted by sudden, startling concern. "You're hurt," she whispered, her hand steadying him. He managed a rough smile, despite the haze of pain. "Just a scratch." Her eyes told him she knew better, but for the first time since he'd met her, she dropped every mask. And in the chaos of betrayal and survival, something undeniable had been forged between them. Trust, fire, and the first flicker of something more. The aftermath came with a hush as heavy security doors sealed, and the last of the mercenaries were dragged away in restraints. The hum of emergency sirens dulled, replaced by the steady murmur of Khan's traffic reporting containment sector by sector. Inside the security hub, Livia Navaruk stood tall again, her posture immaculate despite the chaos, though her eyes kept drifting back to the man seated against the console, blood darkening the side of his janitor's uniform. David's breath came in shallow pulls, but he waved off the medics when they arrived, only relenting when Livia herself crouched beside him and pressed her hand to his chest. "Don't argue," she said softly, the steel in her voice tempered by something warmer. Advanced healing pads sealed the wound, knitting skin with a faint glow. David managed a crooked grin. "Guess the uniform's ruined." Livia's lips quirked despite herself. "You filled it out better than most," she replied, the words escaping before she could stop them. The medics withdrew. Livia turned to the hub's command console, issuing orders with precise clarity. "Turan is under arrest. Broadcast his treachery to every sector. The consortium's mercenaries are contained. Inform the Alliance Council who'll be pressing charges." Her staff obeyed instantly, but David noticed the slight tremor in her hand as she closed the feed. She had trusted Turan for years. The betrayal cut deeper than she would admit aloud. She looked at David then, her mask slipping for only a heartbeat. "If not for you, I would have signed away Proxima. I would be dead." He shook his head. "You listened. That's what saved you?" Their eyes held across the wreckage of the hub, a silent acknowledgement that something irreversible had shifted between them. Later, when the corridors were cleared, and the skyline beyond the glass glowed with the pale fire of dawn, Livia led David into her private suite atop the eastern tower. The room was vast, walls of transparent alloy opening to the galactic capital stretched below, its spires glittering in the first light. David, still in his blood-stained uniform, felt out of place among the sleek furniture and priceless artifacts. Livia, however, crossed the space with ease, removing the last traces of her corporate armor, her hair falling loose like spilled silver over her shoulders. She turned to him not as the CEO of Stellar Apex, but as the woman who had survived betrayal at his side. "You've changed everything," she admitted. 3 weeks ago, you were invisible. Tonight, you're the reason Stellar Apex stands." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "I don't want you to go back to pushing a cart in silence." She handed him a data slate. Its header blazed with corporate authority. "Chief Security Advisor to the CEO. It's more than a job. It's a place at my side." David studied the contract, his roughened fingers brushing the smooth surface. For a moment he said nothing, then set it aside. "I don't want a reward," he said quietly, "but I do want you." The directness of his words left her still. Then a flush of deeper blue spread across her cheeks. Different species. Different worlds, she whispered, almost as if testing the truth aloud. Doesn't mean incompatible, he countered, drawing her close. The distance between them vanished in an instant, their lips meeting in a kiss charged with everything they had survived. Everything unspoken. The galaxy beyond their window spun on. Indifferent, but in that room, two lives had intertwined. A human and an alien billionaire, bound not by contracts or signatures, but by trust and choice. As dawn sharpened into full morning, Livia rested against him, her hair tangled across his chest, her voice a murmur. One condition, David Mercer, she teased softly. No hidden clauses on page 94. His laugh, rough and genuine, filled the suite. Deal. Yet even as warmth settled between them, reports streamed in across the secure network. Analysts confirmed that Tehran's transmissions had already been partially relayed to the Hegemony Consortium. Somewhere beyond the capital, a shadowed boardroom would soon be poring over stolen sovereignty, drafting a false claim to Proxima Centauri. The war for humanity's future was far from over. David tightened his arm around Livia, staring out at the rising sun. He was no longer invisible, no longer a janitor. Whatever storms the galaxy was about to unleash, he would face them not alone, but at her side. And that, he thought, was a contract worth signing. The weeks that followed blurred into a storm of tribunals, news feeds, and boardroom battles that spilled far beyond Stellar Apex's towers. David found himself at the center of it all, no longer a shadow sweeping floors, but a man seated at Livia, Navarx's right hand, as she dismantled the consortium's defenses piece by piece. He wore a new uniform, now not the ill-fitting janitor's jumpsuit, but a dark security jacket marked with the crest of the CEO's office, tailored to his frame. Yet the old instincts never left him. He still walked the perimeters at night, memorized the angles of every corridor, watched for anomalies in systems others ignored. Livia noticed, of course. She always did. One evening, as they stood together on her Skybridge terrace, watching the capital city glow beneath the stars, she asked quietly, "Will you ever stop scanning for exits?" He smiled faintly, his gray eyes catching the light. "Not while there's something worth protecting." Her gaze lingered on him then, not as her advisor, not even as her savior, but as her partner. The title was never spoken, but in her silence, it was real. The final tribunal session should have been a victory lap. Executives of the Hegemony Consortium were paraded in chains, their fraud exposed, their assets frozen. But when the prosecution unveiled intercepted files, the chamber fell into a collective hush. Among them was a copy of the page 94 clause, transmitted off-world before Tehran's arrest. Not destroyed, not contained. The consortium has already ceded false claims to Proxima, the counselor announced gravely. Other factions may rally to their banner. The revelation rippled like a detonation. David felt his chest tighten. He had feared this, but hearing it aloud drove the truth home. They had won a battle, not the war. Livia's hand found his beneath the table, her grip steady, grounding him. When she rose to address the council, her voice carried the weight of a sovereign. Stellar Apex will not yield. Earth's first colony is not a bargaining chip. We stand with humanity, and we will defend Proxima from those who would steal it. Her words lit the chamber like fire. Later, as they walked the quiet halls back to her suite, David could see the fatigue she concealed from the public. He stopped her in the corridor, turning her gently until her eyes met his. This fight isn't over. They'll come again. She studied him, her features illuminated by the glow panels above, and in her eyes he saw not fear but resolve. Then let them. I have you. The simplicity of her faith cut deeper than any contract or title. For a long moment they stood together, the galaxy's weight pressing in around them, until David leaned forward, his forehead touching hers. "We'll need a plan," he murmured. She smiled, a small, fierce curve of her lips. "We'll write it together. And this time, David, there will be no page 94. In the stillness of that vow, David felt the last remnants of his invisibility fall away. He was no longer a man hiding from his past, no longer a janitor in borrowed clothes. He was a partner, a protector, a voice humanity had never expected to be heard in the highest chambers of alien power. The stars beyond the glass seemed to burn brighter, as if Proxima itself were listening. The war ahead would be long, but for the first time in years, David felt certain of one truth, whatever came. He and Livia Navarks would face it not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as allies and perhaps something far more bound by choice.